Namaste.
Namaste.
So, for today's conversation, I thought it might be helpful to first talk about what the direct approach is. So, what is the pointer that is direct and easy and simple? Maybe not easy, but simple. And what obstacles come up in the mind that makes it seem that it cannot be this simple? So, maybe you can start by just talking a little bit about what is the pointer, what's the direct pointer.
Yeah, so one way to approach this direct pointer is simply by recognizing that everything that is here is divine. So when we say divine, of course, it can cause questions around what does it mean to be divine. So let's break it down. So if we look at it, the source of matter itself, as it is well established by science too, is beyond matter. There is no thing there. It's been established by even quantum physics, for example, that when we probe into the atom, finally we come up with nothing, and yet it is not void. There is something there, whether they call it a quantum field or whatever it is, which is indescribable, beyond the senses, beyond any measurement, and which is not a thing, and hence that's why we can say it's no thing, but it appears as everything, because that is the ground from which the atom comes, matter comes, out of which all these various planets and universes come, and out of which life has come, cellular life has come, then plants and animals, and the human existence has come about. So everything fundamentally is coming from that which is no thing. It is the substrate, inexpressible, unknowable source of everything. And in that source rises a mysterious energy, if we can call it that, which manifests as matter, which manifests as things, and then as life, and as up to human beings. So if we go about it in this way, there is no faith involved here, there is no blind belief. It's just a simple, direct inquiry into recognizing that everything comes forth from this source. And that energy that comes forth from this source is what we call as divine. If we don't want to call it divine, we can just call it universal intelligence. Whatever we call it, there is an intelligence that permeates, and that intelligence manifests as the human life as well. And the interesting thing with the human expression, which is probably true in other life forms too, but it is most pronounced in the humans, is there is also in that expression a sense of me, a sense of self. Now, it is certainly not unique to humans, because there has been research that finds that even chimpanzees and other animals have a sense of self, and they kill other tribe monkeys and so on. So, but whatever the reasons are, wherever along the evolution it came, there is a sense of me, a sense of self that is there as the felt reality of every human being. And that sense of self seems to be someone sitting inside the body, sitting inside the mind, who is controlling and experiencing the perceptions and actions of the body and the mind. And that sense of self is what is causing all problems, because that divides itself from life around it, from the universe around it, into a narrow sense of the body, mind as me. And that very sense of separation causes one to look upon every perception as my perception, every action as my action, and then seeking more experience, more pleasure, more of things. And when one turns, then because of the limited nature of all experiences otherwise, then one turns to understanding the source or experiencing God. But the same me comes forth, wanting to experience God, wanting to experience freedom, realization, whatever we call it. So therein lies the conundrum, right? And so the direct approach here is to recognize, first of all, that this me, which is the sense of self that seems to be there in every human being, is itself an expression of the same intelligence, which is a fragmented, partial expression by definition, and it can never grasp the whole. Being part of the whole, it can never grasp the whole, but it is attempting to grasp the whole, and that's the paradox, and thereby it is always in frustration and struggle. So when we question the nature of this me, we find out that this me is only a fiction that is coming up as an expression of this divine energy. And this is again backed by science, because science shows that there is actually no center in the brain that is controlling the experiences or anything, but we feel it is there. And that feeling of a me is driving our experience of living, and that is what is causing identification, that is what is causing strife, conflict, war, everything. So when we recognize all of this rooted in the me, and the me itself is an expression of the divine intelligence, and when one recognizes that any attempt to be free of the me is the me again, it is the me that is attempting to free itself and thereby strengthening it. It is like how a knot, when we try to do something and we only strengthen the knot, similarly, we are strengthening the me by trying to act as the me. When this is recognized, and thereby there is a complete recognition of one's inability to do anything, in that recognition, very counterintuitively, there is freedom, because then one recognizes that it is the way it is. There is a complete acceptance of everything, and that acceptance releases it. And then there is what is called a state of surrender, which is nothing, which is not a sense of doing anything, but a state of being, where one recognizes that there can be nothing done about it. It is the way it is, and it is perfect as it is. And in that recognition of the perfection, it is released. So, this can be called the direct approach, which is inquiring and surrendering to the very source from which everything comes.
There are three things I think we can go a little bit deeper into based on what you just said. One is the divine energy, right? What we call it divine expression, divine energy. Whatever is here right now is divine. And what that means is that there has to be full acceptance of it as it is. So we cannot, any judgment of, good or bad or, favorable or not is again a mind made image of what it wants to be, right? The outcome it wants to be. So, but the divine energy itself, as it is, as you said, is perfect. And there cannot be any wanting it to be different from what it is. So I think we should explore that a little bit more. The second one, which I think is also very important, is the sense of self or the sense of I is a fragmentation, right? And the reason it's a fragmentation is because it's the same mind that's splitting into the sense of self and a thought, objective thought, that then this sense of I is interacting with or taking ownership of, right? So I've said this before too, where it's a unitary moment, right?
Yes,
So the sense of self and the objective thought that it's interacting with or having a relationship with is one unitary moment. So
yes,
the moment we split it into a sense of self and something, then it's seeking or interacting or wants to become better at everything it can, everything that the sense of self wants to do or wants to be, become, um, when it's not recognized as a unitary whole, then it becomes this fragmentation, and that can lead into more strengthening of that fragmentation, which then goes deeper and deeper into a whole, right?
Yep.
Um, the third thing I think we can also come back and explore, which I think is again very important, is you talked about the sense of self wanting to get better at something, and that can create conflict because now there are two senses of self, one wanting to do something and other thinking that it cannot do something or it's never going to get there, right? So this conflict is actually a very good indicator that there's resistance to how things are, and the acceptance is not in that moment of whatever is arising. And the conflict can actually work in so many different ways. It can come up in so many different ways, and recognizing it as a constant resistance or rub, I think is a good indicator then to be free in that moment.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I thought maybe we can go into these three aspects a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's very good. So the second thing you said, right? I think that's probably a good place to start because that can cover the other two as well, which is the unitary movement of thought, which we tend to divide into a me, right? So the nature of thought is that there is, if you look at it very simply, there is memory in the brain, there is some knowledge stored, experiences stored, and all of that. And when there is a stimulus of any kind, internally or externally, it triggers the memory, and there is a response of the memory, which we call as thought. Now, when this rises, it is a single movement that is rising, which is the stimulus and the response moving as one unit, right? So, when I see, for instance, even when I see a pen, the object there stimulates the memory here, and the memory in turn recognizes the pen as a pen, right? It's a very simple example of how memory and thought is used even in perception. There is a simple recognition of the pen there on this table through perception, which is the stimulus provided by the senses, which is then responded to with memory, which is recognizing it as the pen. Now, the same process is what operates in all movement of stimulus and response. But what we do is we say that I am seeing the pen. That is the way we translate it. But in reality, if you look at it carefully, there is only the seeing of the pen, which is a unitary movement. And the very seeing is happening spontaneously, as we said, as a response to the stimulus, right? To separate it and to say that there is the object, here is the subject, I am seeing it. All of this is a secondary process which is rising in memory as me, right? The me then wants to capture this unitary process by dividing it, and that is dualism. That is exactly what where duality comes, right? When we say duality, we are not talking of anything fancy. We are talking of I am seeing the pen, that's duality.
Can I interrupt for a second here?
Yeah.
I think what you said is actually important and we should slow down there.
Okay.
There is the seeing of the pen, which is very true. So there is the image of the pen that's in memory, and through that there's a recognition that there's an object called a pen. And then there's this rising of a sense of self, which then says, I see a pen,
Yes.
right? And I think what's important to recognize is that I is actually coming just a split second
Yes.
after that actual seeing is happening,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's what.
And yeah, and I think that's very important to recognize because as people are hearing this, it's good for them to pause and see if that's true for them as well, right? Because the sense of self is so quick sometimes that even though it comes just a split second later, it's there's a because of conditioning, it appears that I am seeing the pen. We put the
Yes,
I before the pen, right? Whereas the seeing is happening first, and then there's a recognition of a sense of self. Like you said, it's a secondary,
correct.
right, recognition, but it somehow snaps in place as if it's the primary one, right? And that recognition is important because once that is seen, what you're alluding to, where this false sense of self is coming up and taking possession of this memory, becomes very clear.
Yeah, no, yeah, well put. I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly how this process works, where a thought rises, any thought. So, this is, I mean, it's easy in this example with a pen, but it can be seen with any thought. The thought rises, the thinker comes after the thought. They seem to be coming almost together, but there is a immediate ownership that I am having this thought. And the I that is projected as the self that is having the thought is, as you just, in fact, very precisely put it, even, in fact, interestingly, neuroscience has literally proved it that there is a few milliseconds between the actual perception and the sense of self that claims it. In fact, this is interestingly on a slight side note where the illusion of free will also comes. What one beautiful experiment has proved is every decision that is being made rises a few milliseconds before the idea that I am making the decision. And that, because we confuse, just as we say I am seeing the pen, we say I am making the decision, but the I that says I am making the decision rises after the decision, a few milliseconds after. This is actually a very interesting uh, recorded experiment, which literally shows what we have been talking about, that the very notion of free will, which is me, is an illusion because it rises post facto. So, going back to this example of the pen, which is true with any perception, any thought, is that the very sense of me is after the actual perception. Thought creates the thinker. If you look at it in that, if you can put it in that term, there is thought that creates the thinker, there is the perception that creates the perceiver. So this imagination that there is a perceiver separate from the perception, or there is a thinker that is separate from thought, is the play of me. Now the interesting thing here is this: having said all this, it is a spontaneous process. The same experiment showed that it does rise a few milliseconds later, but it inevitably rises in practically every human being, that I am seeing the pen, or I am deciding to drink this cup of tea, or whatever the thought is, the decision is, the perception is. There is a sense of me that rises and takes ownership of it and seems to control and experience the movement that is happening actually spontaneously as one unitary movement. So that is the precise essence of what's going on here. So when we see this, then what happens here is the recognition that this me being a spontaneous rising that divides a unitary movement into a fragmented me that is having that experience. It is the same me that is rising to every thought, including the thought of understanding the truth or understanding, attaining self realization, whatever term one may put it, it is the same me that's rising as a fragmented movement, which is a thought that is being captured by this me to claim false ownership of it. So, for instance, if one has read in a book that there is such a thing as a state of self realization, then that triggers that memory. and then there is a me that rises and says, I want that, or I am going to have that, right? Same thing is happening with very simple example of, that's why we go to, let's say, beautiful waterfalls. There is a seeing of the waterfalls. But what happens is the me rises and says, I have seen the waterfalls. And then it wants to capture it as its experience. And then, therefore, it wants to click a picture of it. It wants to come back. It wants to register it, record it, like it, compare it. All the movement comes because the very unitary movement of seeing is divided into subject and object. There is no subject objectivality in reality. The subject objectivality is a fiction created by this energy called the me. That's the interesting reality of all of us. But the other aspect, as we already alluded to, is it is spontaneous, right? So we know that this happens in every human being. And we know that this me is the source of all strife, because this me divides itself from experience and wants more experience. It divides itself from the body and it wants to therefore worry about having a long life or having this, having more experience, having more pleasure with the body. It divides itself from the mind and wants to understand this and understand that. So every time the me divides itself, it wants more and more of whatever it's dividing against in order to sustain itself. And that more is the very essence of me. It wants more of everything, right? Because the me is sustained by the more, because me is nothing but experience. Actually, there is no such thing as experience, because there is only one unitary movement. Experience is only possible when there is duality. When I am there and something else is there, there's an experience. And because me lives in the world of experience, it can only sustain itself by more and more experience. And therefore, it wants to make then finally truth into an experience, God into an experience. And it wants to experience self realization, and then it projects states of samadhi, states of self realization. It experiences all of this. So, this is the basic conundrum of the me. And when we recognize this, what happens, the beauty of this is that when we recognize that we cannot do anything about it, because when we decide to say that I am going to be free of the me, that is again thought coming, having learned that one has to be free of the me, and then dividing from that thought as me and says I am going to be free of this me. So we can see how it is so, the word is maybe slippery, right? It's so slippery, it's so elusive that it's coming no matter what we do. And when that recognition is there, that there is nothing in the realm of doing that can be ever freeing oneself out of this me. And that recognition is surrender. And when that recognition we alluded to as surrender comes, then the very me is accepted as is. It is what it is. Then what happens?
There are a couple of things we can go into just to make this a little bit more clear. So, the sense of me that's rising up, right, that then wants to seek more experiences. So, when we see a waterfall, for example, the first time we see a waterfall, there's wonder, right? There's just wonder, and we are with it, and there's just seeing. And like you said, then there's a sense of self that we arise that wants to capture that as an experience. And that's why, we either, take a picture or whatever, right? But then what's probably also happening is that is also becomes an image of an experience that the eye is having that seems like a pleasurable experience, right? And then that further reinforces this image of sense of self wanting more experiences,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And if it's a unpleasurable experience, then the eye actually has a conflict with it and doesn't want it,
Right.
right? But I think, again, if it's taken as a single unitary experience, like the first time we see a waterfall or sunset, where there's no sense of self, there's
Right.
just seeing,
Right.
then it's that itself is a unitary experience, and then there's no fragmentation, there's no wanting to seek an experience or
Right.
wanting to capture it in memory or
Yeah.
even reinforcing that sense of self.
Exactly.
But the moment the sense of self comes
Yeah.
and we try to capture that as experience, and there's a thought that arises saying that I want more of this, and we reinforce that in other ways by giving it new experiences,
Yeah.
then it becomes a more conditioned way of concretizing this sense of self or the sense of I.
Yes.
Is there anything else you would want to add
No,
there?
that's very, very aptly put, because that separation that rises, see, as you said, when one sees, even it happens many times when one sees something and suddenly there is a complete absence of the self, and there is just the seeing, right? And in that seeing there is no desire to capture this as an experience or take a picture or do this or do that. There is just seeing, right? But then later memory may come in and record it and say, I want to have more of that, and that's again the same movement of the me. But in that very seeing there is no division, right? This is something that, of course, many glimpse into in many occasions. For example, that's what's called as, even sportsmen, for instance, call being in the zone, which is exactly that, where there is the play, for instance, happening and there is no sense of me playing. The body is almost rhythmically doing what it is meant to do perfectly. Artists perceive it, many times when you are, even when you, it could be something very simple as writing code. There are many occasions where there is just the doing, there is nobody doing it, because the separation as the doer doesn't arise when there is complete absorption in the doing or in the seeing. But post facto, sometimes it takes a while, but most often it's instantaneous. The me rises within a few milliseconds and claims it as my experience, my action, my thought, and so on. So that is the condition of practically all humans, right? And that unitary movement is never left as it is. It is divided always, inevitably. And that is causing the amazing thing here is everybody has this spontaneous rising of the me, but everybody also somewhere very deeply feels that it is causing a sense of lack, a contraction, a lacuna, whatever we put it. There is something that seems wrong about it. Something is missing. It's not whole because it is dividing from the whole. It seems like something is missing, and I always want more. This me always wants more of this, more of that, more of I have to do this, I have to do that, then I have to understand this, understand that. There is no end to that because this me always lives in lack, right? And so there is a also the thing to point there is a inherent recognition. Just as the me rises spontaneously, there is also a spontaneous recognition that something is not quite right with it, and yet it is spontaneous, it is rising, and we identify with it. That is the dilemma of the seeker, or of, for that matter. And the truth is everybody is a seeker. That's the, it's just that there are a few who overtly seek wholeness, but anyone who seeks anything is actually seeking wholeness. They think they can get it through more. This more of seeking more experiences, more pleasures, more power, more money, is the same movement that is there in seeking more spiritual experiences, more spiritual knowledge, because the movement of more is coming out of the me that inherently seems to be something not quite right. And so that's where this whole thing comes. So when we See that all seeking, therefore, is rooted in the same false premise, and the very seeker is an illusion. See, the seeker is not actually there because this me is just a thought that's rising. It is another, or we could say, another energy that's rising, whether we call it a thought or not. There's something rising from the heart, perhaps as me, and permeating the body and claiming ownership. And that seems to have taken over the organism. So that's the experience. So when we see all this very clearly, the beauty of this is the very seeing is the action. See, we always think I have to do something about it. And that is the another illusion of the me, that I have to do something. The very doing is always in time, which is how the me functions. But here there is the recognition that the wholeness is already the ground in which the me rises. So the any doing of the me towards wholeness is again the same illusion that's being perpetrated. But if you recognize that the very me is wholeness, see, that's the conundrum. The me is nothing but an expression of the wholeness. Then when we see that, what happens?
Right. So the direct pointer then is to see the rising of I or the sense of self that's coming up, and recognizing that that's actually part of the either as an energy or expression of the whole, but also it's a pointer back to the wholeness, right?
Yes.
And once then that is released, the sense of self or the I is released, then all there is this the presence of the wholeness already. There's
Yeah.
nothing else that needs to be done or seeked, or any action needs to be performed,
Right.
right? But when the sense of self is given credence to and then acted on, that's when it increases the further division or the fragmentation,
Yep.
and that's what keeps us in the seeking or wanting more experiences, right?
Yep.
So yeah, so the direct pointer then is to recognize that the sense of self is coming up. That is also a divine expression. Nothing
Yep.
wrong there either. It's spontaneous, but just the seeing of it itself is freeing it, right?
That's it.
So it's not a freedom from to somewhere else, but it's
Yes.
just the freedom of from the sense of self that is limiting, right? Taking us
That's
away
right.
from the fullness.
See, yeah, that's exactly it. Because, see, when we recognize that this very rising of the me is spontaneous, energetic expression of the divine, then already there is nobody here. See, so far we have been so identified with this energetic expression as me, and there is no clarity there. We are unconsciously drawn by this energy identified as me and say, I'm having this thought, I'm having this experience, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. When there is a recognition that this me that's rising as an energy is a divine expression which has its own intelligence and which is causing the ignorance, that very seeing is free of that ignorance, because the seeing is not then anymore taking that rising energy as the self. It is just there as the me that's rising, and it doesn't have the charge anymore. It's simply then what is there is only the clear perception, the clear insight, perhaps is a better word, clear insight into the nature of how wholeness divides itself into fragmentation. And when that clear recognition or clear insight is there, then it is only seen as wholeness, which is doing this play of duality and division. And that seeing is grace, is freedom from this me. So we don't have to, therefore, that's why it's very subtle, but it's very simple also, because we don't have to do anything. So when, for example, this expression be still, that's what this is pointing to. Be still doesn't mean do not think, it doesn't mean shut all thoughts, or it doesn't mean keep the body unmoving, none of that. It is this recognition that nothing needs be done and nothing can be done. It is as it is. And when that recognition is there in clear insight, that it is wholeness that is appearing as me, that very clear insight is freedom from this fragmentation.
Coming back to a couple of things that I mentioned early on,
Yeah,
just to go into conflict a little bit because I think that's important. We gave this example of the perception of a pen,
yeah,
right? Or even the perception of making a decision, which is
right.
actually better. So there is a decision that comes up, that is made, that arises, and then this sense of self or I then takes ownership of that decision,
Hmm.
right? If it's recognized that the decision is happening and the sense of self is not engaged with, then any outcome of that decision is accepted just as it is, right?
Yeah,
But if the ownership is taken of the decision, then all these questions arise. Did I do the right thing or not? If things go well, it's like, oh, great, I made a decision, it was perfect.
correct.
And if the decision doesn't go the right way, then we second guess
Yeah,
our sense of self second guesses and goes back, and then either is in misery because of a memory of a decision that was made poorly, or judges it as such, right? And all kinds of, again, this is the conflict that arises, because again, not that the decision was wrong, but there's no acceptance of the outcome of that decision, right?
right,
Whatever it was. And that is what ordainment is. If we accept the outcome of any decision that's happening again spontaneously, then there is no conflict. But if there is a sense of ownership that's taken in,
yeah,
and then the outcome is not accepted as it is, then it
yes,
leads to different kinds of conflict and
yep,
creates further misery.
yep, that's exactly right. I mean, every conflict is only because of resistance. Resistance is there as long as we claim ownership of decision, because then this thought of it could have been, should have been, would have been, all this comes. When we recognize that decision happens spontaneously, then there is no ownership of the decision as mine. Now, there can be deliberation in decision making. It is not to say that one doesn't have to deliberate and just do whatever comes. I mean, people may read it in the wrong way. That's not the pointer here. The pointer here is that any deliberation happens also spontaneously. So, for example, if there is a decision to be made and then it is thought through, it is taking various factors into account, all this can be done. And then, let's say, a final decision is arrived at. That whole process happens spontaneously based on the memory, the knowledge, the information available, all of which is as it is. So the me that is making the decision is itself nothing but a product of the memory, the knowledge, the experience. That is all there is. So when there is a deep acceptance, even if one thinks the me makes a decision, if one recognizes that the very me is nothing but a product of memory, knowledge, past experiences, which it is using to act on the thought, act on the information available, and make a decision. So there is nothing other than the very ground of the entire background that is coming forth spontaneously and making the decision. When we recognize this very clearly, that the very me that rises spontaneously is also coming forth from the same ground of memory, then there is no separate, persistent me to look back and say, I made this decision. It is at best an instantiation of that moment when one takes ownership of that decision, even. But in reality, as we already pointed out, that very ownership is rooted in illusion because the entire decision making is a unitary process. So, whichever way we look at it, the more we get closer to it, the more clarity. See, if one thinks I made the decision, still one can at least recognize that the very me that made the decision is a product of memory, which is already fragmented and which is only the instance of the self as available at that moment through the memory that was there. But in reality, even that is only an illusion because all that is there is the unitary movement of stimulus and response, which is acting with its own intelligence to make the decision. And when we recognize this, that there is no me making the decision, there is only the decision, then there is freedom from ownership of the decision. That's freedom.
And full, yeah, and full acceptance of the
Full
outcome as well.
acceptance. Yeah. When there is no ownership, there is nobody
Yeah,
to resist, nobody to wish otherwise.
right.
It is exactly, that is why it is said every particle is exactly where it's meant to be.
Then to conclude, maybe I thought you could go into your favorite verse from Gita, where Bhagwan says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya,
Yeah.
Mamekam Sharanam Vraja.
Mm.
Because again, that's the surrender of the sense of self, right? The sense of the surrender of the sense of me,
Yeah.
giving up all wanting to do something or achieve something,
Yeah.
and then accepting everything as it is, accepting everything as perfect as it
Yes.
already is, and just flowing along with whatever is spontaneously arising in the moment.
Yeah. So that's, see, when that beautiful verse says Mam Ekam, this Ekam is the divine intelligence. That's what Krishna refers to as one, right? The one divine intelligence is what is manifesting as everything. And it is actually, as we saw already, no thing. That's the beauty of it. It is no thing that is manifesting as everything. And this no thing, which is the source of all, is unknowable, unborn, unexperienceable, right? Unchanging. It is all, that's why, interestingly, even the Upanishads, they always describe only in negative terms because we cannot positively say that it is this. It can only say it is not this, it is not born, it is not changing, it is not within the field of perception, and so on. It is not within the field of knowledge, so on. That no thing, which is the source, which is fullness, is appearing as everything, and it is the one divine intelligence that's rising out of it, the universal intelligence, and that is manifesting as everything. So, when one surrenders unto this divine intelligence, then one is free of this false sense of ownership. There is no me here because the very me that's rising is seen as spontaneously rising from this divine. So it's not that I'm trying to be free of the me, because that's all, as already we pointed out, that's again an activity of the me. But to recognize that the very me that's rising is an expression of this wholeness, of this divine intelligence. And therefore, whether there is the unitary movement without division through this recognition, or even if there is division because of which the me rises and takes ownership, it is seen that that division is also wholeness dividing itself. And that is surrender, that it is exactly as it is meant to be. So, to wish that there be no division is again a movement of thought. When we are absolutely free of any desire of any kind, including freedom from the me, that is order, right? That is the freedom from the disorder, as another friend put it. The disorder comes because of the me and wanting it to be different from what it is. And the very wanting to not have the me is another form of the same disorder. So, to recognize that there's nothing that one can do about it, it is spontaneous, it is what it is. And if the me is there, it is there. If it goes, it goes. That is complete surrender. That is what Krishna refers to by saying completely surrender. It's a state of being where there is no doing of any kind, no sadhana, no effort, no direction, no motive, just full, total acceptance.
This was a wonderful conversation again, and there can't be any other perfect moment to stop.
Okay, yeah, it's a good place to stop. It's a great way to end because that is the essence of the whole pointer is total acceptance. You can put it simply like that. Yeah. Thank
Thank you
you.
again.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Thank you.